Besem Ab, Weld, Wemefes Kadus, Ahadu Amlak, Amen. Besem Ab, Weld, Wemefes Kadus, Ahadu Amlak, Amen. Besem Ab, Weld, Wemefes Kadus, Ahadu Amlak, Amen. Yes, good morning. So, on to chapter 47 of Genesis, and we are still in the story of Joseph and his reunification with his father Israel, Jacob, and the brothers, and they've been instructed to come to Egypt because there's a famine across the land and across the land of Canaan also. So on with the reading, and it's quite long, longer than some of the others recently. And we see how we get on. Give thanks, blessed love. And Joseph comes and declares it to Pharaoh and says, my father and my brothers and their flock and their herd and all they have come from the land of Canaan. And behold, they are in the land of Goshen. And out of his brothers he has taken 5 men and sets them before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh says to his brothers, what are your works? And they say to Pharaoh, your servants are feeders of a flock, both we and our fathers. And they say to Pharaoh, we have come to sojourn in the land, for there is no pasture for the flock, which your servants have. For the famine in the land of Canaan is grievous. And now, please let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen. And Pharaoh speaks to Joseph, saying, your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you. Cause your father and your brother to dwell in the best of the land. They dwell in the land of Goshen. And if you have known, and there are among them the men of ability, then you have set them as heads over the livestock that I have. And Joseph brings in his father Jacob and causes him to stand before Pharaoh. And Jacob blesses Pharaoh. And Pharaoh says to Jacob, How many are the days of the years of your life? And Jacob says to Pharaoh, the days of the years of my sojourns are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not reached the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their sojournings. And Jacob blesses Pharaoh and goes out before Pharaoh. And Joseph settles his father and his brothers and gives a possession to them in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramesses, as Pharaoh commanded. And Joseph nourishes his father and his brothers and all the houses of his father with bread according to the mouth of the infants. And there is no bread in all the land, for the famine is very grievous, and the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan are feeble because of the famine. And Joseph gathers all the silver that is found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the grain that they are buying. And Joseph brings the silver into the house of Pharaoh. And the silver is consumed out of the land of Egypt, for out of the land of Canaan, and all the Egyptians come to Joseph, saying, give bread to us. We do not die before you, though the money has ceased. And Joseph says, give your livestock, and I give to you for your livestock if the money have ceased. And they bring their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gives to them bread for the horses, and for the livestock of the flock, and for the livestock of the herd, and for the donkeys. And he tends them with bread for all their livestock during that year. And that year is finished, and they come to him a second year and say to him, we do not hide from my lord that since the money has been finished, the possession of livestock is to my lord. There have not been left before my lord except our bodies and our ground. Why do we die before your eyes, both we and our ground? Buy us and our ground for bread, and we and our ground are servants to Pharaoh, and give seed, and we live and do not die, and the ground is not desolate. And Joseph buys all the ground of Egypt for Pharaoh, for the Egyptians have each sold his field, for the famine has been severe on them, and the land become Pharaoh's. And for the people he has removed them to cities, from the one end of the border of Egypt even to the other end. Only the ground of the priests has not been bought, for the priests have a portion from Pharaoh, and they have eaten their portion, which Pharaoh has given to them. Therefore they have not sold their ground. And Joseph says to the people, Behold, I have bought you today and your ground for Pharaoh. Behold, seed for you. And you have sown the ground. And it has become to pass in the increases that you have given a fifth to Pharaoh, and fourth of your parts are for yourself, for the seed of the field, and for your food, and for those who are in the houses, and for the food for your infants. And they say, You have revived us. We find grace in the eyes of my Lord, and have been servants to Pharaoh. And Joseph sets it as for a statute to this day concerning the ground of Egypt, that Pharaoh has a fifth, only the ground of the priests alone is not Pharaoh's. And Israel dwells in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen, and they have possession in it, and are fruitful and multiply exceedingly. And Jacob lives in the land of Egypt 17 years, and the days of Jacob, the years of his life, are 147 years. And the days of Israel are near to die. And he calls for his son to Joseph, and says to him, Now, if I have found grace in your eyes, please put your hand under my thigh. And you have done kindness and truth to me. Please do not bury me in Egypt. And I have lain with my fathers. You have carried me out of Egypt, and bury me in their burying place. And he says, I do according to your word. And he says, Swear to me. And he swears to him. And Israel bows himself on his head of his bed. Give thanks, blessed love, yet a breath for cure. So yeah, as I say, quite a long chapter. And just to recap, so at the beginning, Joseph introduces 5 of his brothers to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh again asks, "What's your profession?" And Joseph says they're farmers, or they say that they're farmers. So then Pharaoh says, "Well, go and live in the land of Goshen, which is good for farming. And if any of your people are qualified, then you could also look after my livestock as well." So they end up working for Pharaoh. And if you remember the end of chapter yesterday, chapter 46, that Joseph instructs his brothers and his dad to say they're shepherds because it allows them to live in Egypt but separate, because Egyptians didn't want to live near farmers. They treat them slightly differently, and shepherds. So they're able to live separate and not integrate. And then the next bit is then Joseph brings in his father Israel, Jacob, to meet the Pharaoh. And the first thing is that it says Jacob blesses Pharaoh. So even though Pharaoh's he's the king, he's the lead person in that land, Israel is still strong enough, blessed enough to actually bless Pharaoh. It shows his standing in his confidence and his spiritual strength to actually say he blesses Pharaoh. And he does it twice. He does it at the beginning, and he does it but just before he leaves. So it actually shows that even though he's in the presence of, a great Pharaoh, great king, he still has spiritual confidence and spiritual authority to even attempt to bless the Pharaoh. And the Pharaoh duly accepts the blessing. And then it goes on in terms of Joseph's kind of leadership style, because it says in here how the money started to run out, the silver started to run out. So instead of accepting money for food, because the people are still starving, he starts to accept their livestock instead of money. But then it says after a year they came back because then they were starving again. So Joseph agrees to buy their land and give that to Pharaoh in exchange for food. So what happens is by the end of the chapter, Pharaoh owns most of the land of Egypt because people have sold it to get food. It talks about how the priests were exempt by that because their land was owned by Pharaoh anyway, I think. So they didn't have to sell their land. But by the end of it, Pharaoh's come out of this famine extremely strong. Um, and yeah, we don't know, you know, Joseph's, I guess, not motivation. It doesn't talk about him being exploitative or power hungry or power, it sounds like he's, trying to do the best for the people and trying to get them fed. But what it does do is make Pharaoh extremely powerful by the end, and he owns most of the land of Egypt, and he kind of has the people in the palm of his hand. So it's by the grace of the Pharaoh's kindness that that's not being exploited. But we shall see whether that's honoured as we go through the rest. I suspect we know the answer to that already. Any of you that know the Bible, the next chapter is Exodus, where the people of Israel are kind of, oppressed nation within Egypt. So this is kind of how it's happening. The famine has allowed the Pharaoh to get extremely powerful in Egypt. But that's not without the complicity of Joseph, when we have to own up to that. Joseph, as we've seen throughout this chapter, is kind, he's measured, he's methodical, but he is in a position of power, and that power is starting to, raise questions, I suppose, but that tension hasn't started to happen. This is my interpretation and what I'm bringing to it in a way because of what's going to happen kind of next. So it's just bringing that to attention, I suppose, for further analysis later down the line. So even with clean hands, Joseph actions actually, will cause some complications for the people of Israel later down the line because of how powerful the pharaohs have got. But in terms of this particular pharaoh, he seems to be a man of clean heart and kindness. So let's hope that that is fulfilled throughout his life as we come to the end of Genesis. So we shall see. That's enough of the cliffhangers and the spoilers. But I think, again, the whole of Genesis, but particularly this last section, I think it's been really interesting with the Joseph narrative. And it's spending much longer with Joseph story than it has done with any of the preceding kind of family lines before this. But I think that's for good reason, because it really is about how the kingdom of God was became established and rooted. So I'll end it here. God willing, have a blessed day, and look forward to all that comes. Give thanks.